The day Brandon told me I belonged in cheap motels, something in me didn't just hurt. It shifted. His words weren't shouted. They were tossed carelessly across the dining table like scraps. "Sienna, stop pretending. People like you don't fit in fancy places." He said it with that familiar smirk, the one he'd worn since we were kids, as if mocking me was his private sport. My mother straightened a fork to avoid meeting my eyes. My father stirred his coffee until the sound grated. No one defended me. And in that moment, humiliation and clarity fused into something I didn't yet understand, but one day it would become the force that remade my entire life. I hadn't asked for much, just a simple family getaway, a lodge by the lake with a fire pit, and the kind of quiet only small towns offer. I pictured the four of us sharing hot chocolate, playing cards, maybe laughing for once without someone needing to win. But the second I slid the brochure across the table, Brandon grabbed it and scanned it like he was checking the quality of a bargain bin cereal box. You think this is a nice place? Come on, Sienna, you have the taste of someone who chooses the first motel off the freeway. His voice carried that casual cruelty I'd grown up absorbing. I waited for my parents to say something, anything. They didn't. My mother murmured something about the place looking rough around the edges, and my father cleared his throat as if that counted as support. I felt the sting rise, but refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing it. I excused myself, reached my car, and the facade cracked before I even started the engine. Brandon's laughter followed me all the way home, loud in my mind, even though the house was silent. For days, the shame clung to me. Every time I remembered the look on his face, smug, almost bored, I felt that old familiar weight settle across my chest. It wasn't just that he mocked my idea. He mocked me, as if I had no right to imagine anything better. Then life delivered its next blow. The bakery where I worked closed without warning. One morning I walked in to find the cases empty, and my boss folding boxes. That afternoon, I carried home a small cardboard carton of belongings, wondering how a woman my age could still feel like she was being set back to zero. Yet buried in all that collapse was a quiet opening I didn't recognize at first. A week later, while helping my friend Lucy clear out her late aunt's house, something unexpected caught my eye. She handed me a bundle of old travel magazines tied with a faded ribbon. I opened the first one, and a small cliffside boutique hotel filled the page. Warm lights glowing through big windows, soft colors, an intimate dining room where every detail seemed chosen with care. I didn't know why it hit me the way it did. Maybe because I'd spent so long feeling small, the idea of creating a place designed to uplift others felt strangely healing. Whatever the reason, I devoured those magazines until my fingertips were smudged with dust. Every article, every photo, every interview with hotel owners stirred something that had been dormant for years. The curiosity grew into research. Research turned into late-night studying. Studying turned into obsession. While the world slept, I sat at my tiny kitchen table learning about lighting, guest psychology, coastal decor, signature scents, details that transformed a building into an experience. Then on a quiet Thursday morning, a real estate listing appeared on my screen. Sea Whisper Inn, coastal town. 8 rooms, weather-beaten, neglected, and heartbreakingly beautiful beneath the decay. The price was so low, I reread it 3 times. I drove down to see it the next day. The inn sat at the edge of a bluff facing the ocean, as though it had been keeping a lonely watch for years. Salt-stained shingles, chipped railing windows fogged with age. But the moment I stepped onto the deck and heard the waves breaking beneath me, the world fell away. Something inside me rose, instead slow, unsteady, but real. The realtor walked me through the place, sagging ceilings, cracked tiles, a kitchen frozen in another decade. I listened, nodded, and took it all in. The flaws didn't scare me. They intrigued me. I could imagine sunlight flooding these rooms, fresh linens billowing in the ocean breeze, guests feeling safe, cared for, restored. A place with soul. I drove home with the windows down, letting the wind cool the wild hope burning in me. For once, I kept the idea close. I didn't ask my parents what they thought. Their caution would smother the spark before it had a chance, and I certainly didn't tell Brandon. He demolished the dream with one sarcastic remark the same way he always had. This time I protected it. Weeks passed. Fear and excitement pulled me in opposite directions, but the inn never left my mind. Every night I found myself picturing how it could look, how it could feel, who I could become inside it. On a gray afternoon in early spring, I walked into the realtor's office and signed the papers with hands that shook not from doubt, but from finally choosing myself. When the keys slid into my palm, they felt heavier than metal. They felt like a beginning. Outside, the wind carried the scent of the sea, sharp and clean. The fear remained, but it no longer led. Something else had taken its place, a quiet resolve I didn't know I possessed. Brandon's voice had tried to define my limits. Buying that inn was the first step in erasing them. Later, there would be renovations, failures, breakthroughs, long nights, and moments that tested every belief I had about myself. Later, there would be the transformation no one saw coming. Later, Brandon would stand in the lobby of my boutique hotel and bow without recognizing me. But for now, all I knew was this: a single cruel sentence had pushed me toward the life I was meant to build. And one day, he would regret ever saying it. The first morning I walked into the Sea Whisper Inn as its owner, the building felt like it was testing me. The wind pushed against the warped front door, the floorboards complained with each step, and the faint smell of mildew clung to the walls like a warning. I stood there with the keys still warm in my hand, taking in the peeling wallpaper and sun-bleached carpet, wondering what kind of person I had to become to turn this forgotten shell into the place I saw in my mind. Outside, the ocean roared, as if cheering someone far braver than I felt. Lucy arrived an hour later, carrying 2 coffees and a roll of painter's tape. "You look like you just met a ghost," she said, handing me a cup. "Maybe I did," I murmured, "the ghost of my future bad decisions." She laughed and pushed open the curtains, letting sunlight pour through dusty glass. A small miracle happened. Even in its worn state, the room glowed. "See?" she said softly. "There's something here. It just needs a chance." The rest of the day became a slow excavation of potential. We pulled up old carpet, discovering wooden floors hiding beneath the grime. We tested the plumbing only to find the pipes groaned but still worked. The deck out back sagged, yet the view from it was breathtaking: waves striking the rocks in steady rhythm, gulls tracing wide circles above the cliffs. All afternoon, ideas chased one another through my head. Earth-tone linens, driftwood decor, a breakfast terrace facing the sunrise, a signature candle scent, something coastal but warm. I could almost hear guests laughing over morning coffee. By sunset, exhaustion settled into my bones, but something brighter lived alongside it. I wasn't just fixing an old inn. I was building a place where people felt seen. I drove home to my apartment, still smelling of dust and ocean air. My parents called as I walked inside, the timing so perfect it felt like fate giving me a test. Mom's voice reached through the phone, thin and careful. "Honey, we've been thinking. Maybe you should stay with us for a while. After losing your job, I worry you're not making the most stable choices." She meant well, she always did, but her words still pressed on the sore spots I carried since childhood. "I'm okay, Mom," I answered. "Really? What are you doing with all your free time?" Dad chimed in. "Free time." I looked at my hands, still stained from tearing up carpet. If only they knew. My silence stretched too long, and my mother filled it with a sigh. "Sienna, you know your brother's wedding is coming up. It might help if you two tried to get along. He's just protective." Protective was a generous word for a man who spent years chipping away at my confidence. "We'll see," I said, ending the call before the conversation dragged me back into their familiar cycle. The next morning, I returned to the inn and met Frank, the contractor Lucy had recommended. He studied the building with an expression somewhere between intrigue and disbelief. "You're taking on a lot," he said finally. "I know. This place needs more than cosmetic work." "I know." His eyes narrowed. "You're committed," I nodded, hoping my voice didn't betray the nerves tightening in my stomach. "Completely." Something in my tone must have convinced him. "All right," he said. "Let's see what we can save." For the next several days, we walked room to room. He explained what needed replacing, what could be restored, and what should have been condemned years ago. Each estimate made my savings feel smaller, yet the vision I held grew sharper with every problem we uncovered. On the fourth day, we reached the last room on the second floor, a corner room facing the ocean. The window frames were cracked, the plaster chipped, but the view stole my breath. The sunlight spilled across the floor in a long golden streak. "This one'll be the gem when you're done," Frank said. "Every inn has a signature room. This could be yours." I pictured soft ivory bedding, sheer curtains swaying with the breeze, a small journal on the nightstand inviting guests to write their stories, a place to heal, a place to breathe. I touched the window frame lightly. "This one's mine," I whispered, and the decision settled into my bones like truth. Later that night, I spread receipts and estimates across my kitchen table, mapping out what I could afford and what would have to wait. Fear crept in like a draft, quiet, persistent. What if I failed? What if the inn swallowed every dollar I had? What if Brandon's voice echoed through my future the same way it always echoed through my past? Halfway through the night, I pushed back my chair and stood at the window staring at my reflection. I didn't see the girl he mocked. I saw a woman covered in dust and hoped someone willing to learn and fight and build something that mattered. I returned to the table, picked up a pen, and wrote a new list, not of repairs, not of expenses, but of promises. This inn will have heart. Every guest will feel valued. No one will ever be made small here. I will not quit no matter how loud doubt becomes. By the time the sun rose, the fear hadn't vanished, but it had softened. Dreams rarely arrive wrapped in certainty. Sometimes they start with shaky hands and a stubborn refusal to back down. A few hours later, I pulled into the inn's driveway again. Workers were unloading tools. The air hummed with the first real notes of transformation. I stood there for a moment, letting the sound settle inside me. The project was bigger than I'd expected, harder than I'd imagined, more expensive than I'd prepared for. But as I walked across the loose gravel toward the front door, one thing felt unmistakably clear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rebuilding something for approval. I was building something because it called to me, and no part of me wanted to hand that dream over to anyone else ever again. The day the demolition truly began, the Sea Whisper Inn sounded alive for the first time, saws buzzing, hammers striking rhythmically, workers shouting measurements across the hallways. Amid the noise, a strange peace settled in me. For once, the chaos belonged to a future I had chosen, not one life had cornered me into. I carried boxes of old linens down the hallway when my phone rang. Brandon's name flashed on the screen. I froze mid-step, the box pressing against my ribs. He rarely called unless he needed something or wanted an audience for his opinions. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Sienna, where are you?" His tone had that familiar impatience, as if the world existed to report to him. "At work," I said. "At work. Since when Mom said you lost your job. I'm working on something new." Silence stretched, sharpened. "New? What does that even mean? Are you baking in someone else's kitchen now?" A worker walked past me carrying a broken cabinet. I stepped aside. "I'm busy, Brandon." He ignored that. "Well, whatever you're doing, don't forget my engagement dinner this weekend. Don't wear anything weird? Okay?" Claire's parents are classy. They appreciate elegance. The irony nearly made me laugh. The man who told me I belonged in cheap motels now cared about elegance. "I'll think about it," I said. "No, I need you to just follow the plan for once," he pressed. "This is important, Sienna. Don't embarrass me." It was a tone he'd used all our lives, authoritative, dismissive, certain he had the right to dictate my choices. In the past, I would have apologized, tried to fit the mold he carved for me. Not this time. "Brandon, I have a lot going on. If I come, I come. If not, you'll live." He sputtered, caught off guard. "Are you being serious right now?" "Yes." I ended the call before he regrouped. For several minutes, my heartbeat thudded in my throat, not from fear, but from the shock of finally telling him no. When I stepped back inside, Frank glanced up from measuring beams. "Everything okay?" "It will be," I said. He nodded as if he understood without needing details. Then let's talk about flooring. We spread samples across a folding table, bleached oak, warm walnut, sandy birch. My fingers drifted over each one, sensing how they could reshape the room's entire character. This one, I said, tapping the pale oak. Light, airy. It'll brighten the space. Frank grinned. Good choice. And you're sure you want to open by early summer? I'm sure. Then we keep moving. Work filled every corner of the day. Decisions piled up, paint tones, shiplap angles, outdoor lighting, mattress quality, kitchen layout. I didn't know half the industry terms at first, but each hour made me a little braver. Around mid-afternoon, Lucy arrived carrying iced teas and a stack of beach-themed color palettes. Her presence immediately softened the noise of drills and scraped metal. You look like you've been wrestling drywall, she said, handing me a drink. I have been, I said, taking a grateful sip, and I'm losing. You'll win, she replied with complete certainty. Now show me the rooms you claim aren't haunted. We walked upstairs, passing exposed studs, rolled-up carpet, and buckets of plaster. She ran her hand along the window trim of what would become the signature room. This is magic sienna. Her voice dropped. It already feels like you. Those words warmed a part of me no one had spoken to in years. Being seen for who I was, becoming not who I had been, felt like stepping into full sunlight. We spent the next hour sketching ideas. She suggested coastal sage for the hallway. I proposed linen white for the rooms. She championed handcrafted pottery mugs instead of generic hotel cups. I imagined blankets soft enough that guests would curl into them like a sanctuary. By the time she left, the inn felt less like rubble and more like a blueprint of possibility. Night arrived quietly. Workers packed up. Tools clattered into metal boxes. The building exhaled the way homes do when left alone after a long day. I wandered to the back deck with a bottle of water, letting the ocean wind brush my face. Below, waves collided with the rocks in a stubborn rhythm, an echo of my own persistence. My phone buzzed again. A text this time. Mom, your brother says you hung up on him. Please don't fight today. Another message followed almost instantly. Dad, we want peace for the family. Be patient with your brother. He means well. A familiar pressure built behind my ribs. They'd always equalized everything. Every cruelty from Brandon softened with excuses. Every hurt I felt dismissed as overreaction. Before I could respond, another message lit the screen. Brandon, don't forget the dinner. Claire wants the family to look unified. Unified. What a polished word for controlled. I locked my phone and set it face down on the deck railing. The ocean roared as if answering him for me. Standing there, I understood something I'd never articulated before my family didn't mind when I was small, uncertain, or struggling. Smallness kept the peace. But a woman building something of her own, a woman stepping out of the role they boxed her into, that was unacceptable. And that was exactly why I had to keep going. The sun dipped lower, coloring the water amber. Waves rolled in, deliberate and relentless. Everything about that moment, wine salt sound, felt like a promise that change didn't need permission. Inside, the inn glowed under temporary construction lights. Dust floated in the beams like drifting stars. The place was still half broken, but it already felt alive with purpose. I walked back into the hallway, running my fingertips across the freshly sanded banister. We're going to get there, I whispered, not to the inn, but to the version of myself I was slowly meeting. This was no longer about proving Brandon wrong. It was about proving myself right. And tomorrow, the work would begin all over again, with new decisions, new obstacles, new discoveries. But for the first time, the future didn't scare me. It waited for me. The morning the electricians arrived, the Sea Whisper Inn felt like a living thing, unraveling and rebuilding itself at the same time. Wires hung from the ceiling like tangled vines, breakers clicked in the hallway, and the hum of drills mixed with the steady pulse of the ocean outside. I stood in the middle of the lobby with a clipboard in hand, pretending I understood the map of circuits sketched in front of me. Frank walked over, wiping dust from his brow. Electrical's rougher than expected, he said. Half the system needs replacing, maybe more. My stomach tightened. How much more are we talking about? He gave a number that made my vision blur for a second. I forced myself to breathe. Okay, do what needs to be done. You sure I'm sure, I said, even though the certainty lived only in my voice, not in my bank account. He nodded and disappeared into the maze of wires. As the day unfolded, every corner of the building demanded attention, rotted beams behind the kitchen wall plumbing that needed replacing, windows swollen from years of salt air. Each discovery added another weight to the growing stack of estimates on my desk. By noon, my savings plan looked like wishful thinking. Lucy arrived carrying sandwiches and a pile of paint chips. She studied my face as she set the food down. "You look like someone just handed you bad medical results." I handed her the newest estimate. She let out a low whistle. "Wow. Okay, that's something." "I knew this would be hard," I said, leaning against the doorway. "I didn't realize it would feel like the building was swallowing money for breakfast. It's an old inn. It's supposed to fight back before it lets you save it." She nudged me with her shoulder. "You're tougher." I wanted to believe her. We walked through the rooms discussing lighting warmth and trim styles. She held paint swatches against the walls, trying to find tones that felt like sunrise. Despite everything falling apart structurally, the design conversation filled me with a sense of direction. I could almost see the finished space, soft ivory walls, driftwood frames, gentle light at dusk. For a few hours, the dream felt reachable again. Around mid-afternoon, a loud crack echoed through the building. Workers shouted from the back pantry. Frank hurried ahead of me, and I followed the sound. A section of the ceiling had collapsed under old water damage, dropping plaster and insulation across the floor. Dust clouded the air. One worker coughed violently while brushing debris from his shoulders. Frank muttered a string of words too colorful to repeat. I stood frozen, unable to process another disaster. "We'll fix it," he said finally. "You keep saying that," I whispered. "Because it's true." When the dust settled and workers cleared the space, I walked outside to steady myself. The breeze carried the tang of salt water and a trace of distant jasmine. I leaned against the railing, forcing my shaking hands into stillness. My phone buzzed. My mother. I considered ignoring it, but the guilt of silence pulled me to answer. "Sienna, honey, how are you?" She asked, her tone warm but laced with that perpetual worry she reserved only for me. "I'm okay. You sound tired. It's been a long day." She hesitated. "Your brother told us you've been acting different, distant. We're concerned." I swallowed hard. "I'm working on something important, Mom." "What kind of something?" I paused. Telling her would open the door to opinions and doubt. Not telling her meant keeping the one safe boundary I'd finally built. "Just trust me," I said gently. Her sigh drifted through the phone. "I do trust you. I just wish you'd let us help." Help meant steering me away from risk. Help meant wrapping me back into the smallness that felt comfortable to them. "I'm okay," I said again. When the call ended, the silence tasted bitter. It wasn't that I didn't want family support. I wanted the kind where people believed in you. But I'd never had that, not from them. The ocean wind picked up lifting strands of my hair. I closed my eyes and reminded myself why I chose this path. I wanted to create something that didn't exist for me growing up. A place where people were treated with care instead of condescension. A place where someone like me could walk in and feel immediately at home. Back inside, the workers packed up equipment for the day. Tools clanged into metal boxes, sawdust settled on the floors, and the inn exhaled that deep, tired breath of a place undergoing transformation. I walked into the future signature room, the one facing the ocean. The floor was stripped bare, the walls open to their bones, wires dangling like threads of some unwritten story. Yet somehow this raw, exposed state made the potential even clearer. I stood at the window as the late afternoon sunlight spilled over the cliffside, warming the empty room. The golden light washed over everything, transforming the wreckage into something strangely beautiful. Maybe that's what the inn was trying to teach me. Beauty wasn't the absence of damage, it was what rose after. A knock sounded at the door frame. Frank leaned against it, arms crossed. "You still in?" I didn't respond right away. The question wasn't really about construction. He was asking if I still believed in myself. "I am," I said quietly but confidently. "I'm all the way in." A slow smile stretched across his face. Then let's build you a masterpiece. Later that night, after the last truck drove off, I stayed behind. The inn glowed under a string of temporary lights, warm against the deepening evening. I walked the hallway slowly, fingertips brushing the exposed studs, feeling the roughness of old wood and the coolness of new beams waiting to be fitted. This building had been neglected for years, quietly decaying in the shadows. Now it was being torn apart and rebuilt piece by piece, messy, unpredictable, demanding more resources than planned. In a way, the inn wasn't that different from me. Maybe that's why I couldn't walk away. On the drive home, fatigue sank into my bones. But beneath it lived a quiet certainty this was the right path. Uneven, expensive, overwhelming, but mine. As I parked outside my apartment, I glanced back at the road I'd traveled all day, and something clicked with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. Brandon could mock me my entire life. My parents could question every choice I made. Doubt could come at me from every angle. But none of them had the power to stop a woman who finally decided she was worth her own dream. Tomorrow would bring new problems. It always did. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of them. I was ready. A week into the hardest stretch of renovations, the Sea Whisper Inn looked like a battlefield. Sheets of drywall leaned against walls stripped down to studs. Buckets of joint compound sat open on the floor, and the sound of sand drifted through every hallway like a gritty chorus. I walked in carrying 2 boxes of light fixtures when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Heard you bought a hotel. Is that real, Theo?" I stared at the screen, momentarily thrown. Theo Calder was my former coworker from the bakery, someone I'd shared early mornings, cramped ovens, and countless burnt pastries with. We hadn't spoken in months. Before I replied, the front door opened, and Frank strode in. "Got a minute?" he asked, already leading the way toward the kitchen. "I need you to look at something." A section of the subfloor had dark stains spreading across it. He crouched down and pressed the wood with a screwdriver. The tool sank easier than it should have. "Water damage again?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "Looks like an old pipe leak. We'll have to replace more flooring than expected." Another expense, another reason to panic, another silent reminder that I had jumped off a cliff without checking the depth of the water first. I could feel the spiral forming in my chest, the kind that used to send me running for comfort, for approval, for someone else to tell me what to do. But this time, the instinct didn't land anywhere, so I crouched beside him. "Okay, tell me the plan." He glanced at me, perhaps expecting tears or frustration. Instead, I took out my notebook and wrote down every step he listed. When he finished, he closed the toolbox with a firm snap. "You're handling this better than most owners would. I don't have the luxury of falling apart." He nodded once deeply as if respecting something unspoken. When he went back to gathering equipment, I sat on an overturned paint bucket and finally responded to Theo. "Yeah, it's real, and barely standing. But it's mine," he replied instantly. "Want help?" "I'm good with tools. Not as good as YouTube thinks I am, but good enough." "Are you serious?" I typed. "I don't joke before noon." "Then send me the address." For the first time all morning, I laughed. An hour later, his car pulled into the gravel driveway, music thumping faintly through the windows. He stepped out wearing jeans, a faded t-shirt, and the same easy grin he used to disarm customers when the bakery ovens broke. "So this is your masterpiece," he said, looking up at the facade with exaggerated awe. "This is my disaster," I corrected. "Every great story starts with one." We gave him a tour me with growing embarrassment, him with genuine admiration. Where I saw damage, he saw potential. Where I saw cost, he saw character. "You're not overwhelmed?" he asked when we reached the courtyard. "I am," I admitted, constantly. "Good. Means you're doing something big." That simple line landed deeper than he knew. He rolled up his sleeves without hesitation. "Put me to work, boss." Lucy arrived later with 3 gallons of primer greeting Theo, like she'd known him her entire life. The two of them dove straight into clearing debris from the courtyard, laughing between tasks as if this wasn't heavy, messy labor. Watching them, something warm settled in my chest. These weren't childhood friends or blood relatives. They weren't people who felt obligated to love me. They were showing up because they wanted to, because they believed in what I was building. It felt like discovering a new kind of family, one that didn't disappear when things got difficult. As the afternoon stretched on, the three of us worked side by side. We hauled broken tiles, pulled rusted nails out of old boards, and swept the courtyard until the flagstones appeared beneath the grime. The sun climbed high overhead, casting bright warmth on the chaotic beauty of our progress. At one point, Theo looked around and said, "When this place opens, it's going to be beautiful, Sienna. You're building something people will feel, not just see." His confidence in me felt almost foreign. It made my throat tighten unexpectedly. By late afternoon, Frank called me into the future dining room. He held a clipboard filled with new estimates. "Before you see these, understand something. Every inn this old has surprises. None of this is your fault." That alone softened the blow. We reviewed each item: electrical corrections, new piping reinforcement for the deck. The total expanded like a slow, painful inhale. I felt dizzy, but I stayed upright. "I'll manage," I said quietly. He studied me for a moment, then lowered the clipboard. "I've worked with owners who didn't care. I've worked with owners who only wanted quick profit. You're not either of those." He paused. "If you ever get stuck, tell me. We'll figure it out." It wasn't a pity. It was respect. I nodded, grateful beyond words. When the crew left for the day, the inn slipped into an evening hush. The three of us, me, Lucy, and Theo, carried folding chairs onto the back deck. The sky stretched wide in shades of coral and violet. Below, the waves rolled in with lazy steadiness, as if applauding our stubbornness. Theo cracked open a bottle of sparkling water. To the Sea Whisper, he announced, "Future Queen of the Coast." Lucy raised her bottle. "And to Sienna, who apparently has the spine of a lighthouse." They clinked their drinks, and I felt myself flush at the praise. "I'm just trying to keep the place from collapsing." "You're doing a lot more than that," Theo said. We sat in comfortable silence for a long moment, listening to the ocean. Later, as the stars appeared over the water, I leaned on the railing and let the breeze cool my skin. The inn creaked behind us, old but willing to change. For the first time since buying it, the fear didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a companion one that reminded me I was alive, growing, choosing. Support hadn't come from the family I hoped for. It arrived from the people who saw not what I had been, but what I was becoming. And that was enough to keep going. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. But tonight, I felt strong enough to meet them. I smelled it before I saw it. A thin, sharp scent drifting down the hallway, too faint to be smoked from outside, too metallic to ignore. I paused halfway through the new wing paint roller still in my hand and followed the odor toward the laundry room. The door was cracked open. A coil of electrical wire lay on the floor, one section darkened as if scorched. My stomach tightened. "Frank!" I shouted, already stepping inside. He came running from the courtyard. One look at the outlet panel stopped him cold. The edges were singed, a faint curl of smoke rising from the drywall. "Everyone out," he ordered. "Now!" The crew scattered, grabbing their bags and tools as they headed for the exit. I stood frozen for a beat, watching a single wisp of smoke brighten into a thin thread that crept upward. The room still looked ordinary, just a drier, unfinished walls, the humming sound of the ocean outside. But beneath that ordinary shell, something had almost gone terribly wrong. Frank cut the main power and ripped off the panel cover. The wiring inside was a mess of melted insulation and blackened copper. That could have sparked a full fire, he said. If we'd left for lunch 10 minutes earlier? He didn't finish. The image formed anyway, a hotel I'd fought for reduced to ashes before it ever had a chance. I swallowed hard. What caused it? Improper wiring. This wasn't done by a professional. He stripped away the damaged pieces with controlled precision. "You didn't touch this, right?" "Of course not." "Then someone before you patched something together. Badly." A memory surfaced: Brandon touring the property with me months ago, mocking the walls, laughing about cheap motel wiring. I had brushed it off as another jab. Now I wondered who had owned this place before me and what shortcuts they took. Frank stepped back, shaking his head. "We need a licensed electrician in here first thing tomorrow. I don't want anyone near this panel until it's redone." The hallway filled with a tense quiet. Outside, the construction team gathered, worried murmurs rising around them. I forced myself to breathe steadily and address them. "We're okay," I said, projecting calm I did not feel. "We caught it early. We fix it and move forward." Lucy arrived minutes later, panting from running across the property. I saw the smoke from the courtyard. "Are you okay, shaken?" I admitted. "But fine." She wrapped me in a quick, fierce hug. "This place is not burning down on our watch. Not after all you've survived." Theo joined us holding a half-installed light fixture. Whoever wired that outlet should lose their license if they even had one. "Frank thinks it was patched years ago," I said. Theo exhaled slowly. "The universe really wants to test how bad you want this hotel." "I'm starting to notice," I said with a faint laugh. The electrician arrived the next morning, a middle-aged woman named Helena with sharp eyes and a calm manner that instantly grounded the chaos. She crouched by the panel and examined everything carefully. "This was negligence," she said, gesturing to the wires. "Someone used the wrong gauge entirely. This setup wasn't just unsafe, it was dangerous from day one." I leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "Can it be fixed?" "Yes, but we'll need to replace the whole line, and probably check every outlet in this wing." There went another chunk of my budget. But what else could I do? Safety wasn't optional. As her team began the rewiring, the crew shifted to outdoor work. The courtyard echoed with hammering, scraping, and the rhythmic thud of dismantling part of the old deck. I paced between rooms, overseeing tasks, making decisions, signing off on materials. Each choice felt heavier than the last. Sometime in the afternoon, when the noise slowed and the sun warmed the veranda, I sat on the steps overlooking the ocean. The waves moved in steady intervals, a contrast to the chaos behind me. Theo sat down beside me, handing me a bottle of cold water. "Rough day one, miswired outlet almost took everything." He nudged my shoulder lightly. But it didn't. That's the difference. I closed my eyes, letting the breeze brush across my face. "I can't afford many scares like this. You're allowed to be scared, Sienna. You just can't let it stop you." The sincerity in his voice steadied something inside me. When Helena finally approached us, her hands covered in dust, but her expression relieved, I braced myself. "We secured the panel," she said. "It's safe for now. I'll return in the morning with replacements to finish the rest." "Thank you," I said, meaning it with my whole heart. She nodded once. "You're building something special. Don't let this shake you." As she left, Lucy came running with her phone. "You need to see this." A video played, the one Brandon had posted on his social media months ago, the day I told my family about the inn. He filmed the crumbling exterior, zoomed in on the peeling paint, the sagging porch. The caption read, "My sister bought a haunted shack. Pray for her. Cheap motel energy." He thought it was funny. I stared at the screen, the memory dredging up humiliation I thought I'd buried. He mocked me before, but back then I still believed he'd come around. I still believed there was kindness beneath the arrogance. Lucy's voice softened. "Maybe it's time to accept who he really is." I locked the phone and handed it back. "He'll see eventually, see what? That I didn't buy a haunted shack. I bought a future. The fire scare, the wiring failure, the exhaustion, they fused into something stronger. A kind of clarity. The inn wasn't fighting me, it was testing me, and so far, I was still standing. By sunset, the crew packed up. The property quieted again, the ocean now louder than the tools. I walked through the halls alone, touching the newly sanded railings, the patched walls, the spaces we had saved from disaster. The air smelled faintly of fresh lumber and salt. Near the laundry room, I paused, running my fingers along the new metal panel Helena installed temporarily. "You're safe now," I whispered, almost amused that I was talking to a building. But the Sea Whisper Inn felt alive, fragile, stubborn, and quietly hopeful. Much like me. I stepped onto the veranda and leaned against the railing, watching the horizon swallow the last of the light. This place had nearly burned today, yet it endured. And if it could keep going, so could I. Tomorrow will bring more challenges, but tonight, survival was enough. Brandon's text popped up just as I finished sweeping the front steps. "Heard about the electrical issue. Mom's worried. We're coming by." No question mark. No asking if it was okay. Just a statement, as if he still had the right to walk into my life whenever he wanted. A cold pulse moved through my chest. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stared at the screen. For 3 years, I'd built this place in silence. For 3 years, they hadn't cared enough to call to ask if I needed help, to check if I was eating, sleeping, breathing. And now, because they caught wind of a scare, they wanted to show up. Lucy walked by carrying a box of linens. "What's wrong?" "My family's coming," I said. She stopped mid-stride. Right now, apparently. The box lowered slowly to the ground. Do you want us here when they arrive? I don't want to face them alone, I admitted. She squeezed my arm. Say no more. Theo appeared a moment later, wiping dust off his shirt. I heard voices. Is everything okay? Brandon's on his way. His jaw tightened. He didn't ask if I wanted him to stay. He just stayed. The sound of an engine cracked the quiet like a warning shot. A sleek blue SUV rolled into the gravel driveway, crunching rocks beneath expensive tires. My parents sat in the front. Brandon climbed out of the back seat, designer sunglasses, and a smug expression he didn't bother hiding. He took one look at the inn and let out a low whistle. Still standing, huh? Guess miracles happen. Theo folded his arms. She kept it standing. Brandon's eyes flicked to him. And you are? Someone who actually helps. Brandon smirked. Cute. My mother hurried toward me, concern etched across her face. Sweetheart, we came as soon as we heard something happened. Your brother said there was a fire. It wasn't a fire, I corrected. Just faulty wiring. That's still dangerous, she said, then looked around. Are you sure this place is safe? Maybe you should come home for a while. Home. That small word hit me harder than the smoke scare. My father hung back, scanning the property as if assessing the structural integrity rather than my well-being. Sienna, places like this require professionals. You were always creative, but this is real work, real responsibility. The way he said creative felt like an insult wrapped in concern. Brandon clapped his hands. Good news is, I brought you a contractor. Guy from my gym. Reliable. Not cheap, but you want quality, right? I already have someone, I said. Frank Brandon scoffed. Mom said he's old school. Probably the reason the wiring burned. Frank stepped out from behind the tool shed at that exact moment. Heard my name? Brandon turned surprised. You're still here every day, Frank answered coolly. Brandon shrugged. Well, maybe you could use backup. I don't need backup. I said the words calm, but firm. I need you all to stop assuming I can't handle my own life. My father frowned. We're trying to help. No, you're trying to correct a decision you never approved of. Brandon laughed under his breath. Sienna, come on. You bought a falling-apart motel in the middle of nowhere. Be serious. Lucy stepped forward, her expression steady. It's not falling apart. It's transforming. And she's the one doing it. Brandon gave her a slow, condescending look. Right. You must be part of the dream team. I am, she replied. The air tightened, the kind of tension that makes even the breeze hold still. My parents exchanged a look that carried years of silent judgment. My mother touched my arm gently, almost pleading. Sweetheart, we just think you're overwhelming yourself. Why didn't you tell us you bought this place? Because you would have crushed the dream before it even formed. Because the last time I told you I wanted to do something different, you laughed. Because Brandon said I belonged in cheap motels while he aimed higher. But I didn't say any of that, not yet. Instead, I gestured toward the broken deck, the unfinished paint, the exposed beams. This place is mine, all of it, and I'm learning as I go. My father adjusted his glasses. But at what cost? You already struggled after leaving your job. We thought you'd moved past impulsive decisions. Impulsive. That word cut deeper than he knew. Theo spoke up. She's building something real, something people will love. Brandon rolled his eyes. Relax, man. She doesn't need cheerleaders. She needs reality. I stepped in front of Theo, stopping the escalation. You don't get to talk to him like that. Brandon blinked. Look at you. Getting brave. The old version of me would have folded. Would have backed down. Would have apologized just to keep the peace. Not today. This isn't bravery, I said quietly. It's ownership. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Even the gulls circling above seemed to pause their cries. My mother touched her necklace nervously. We didn't come here to fight. I know, I said. But you came here expecting the girl I used to be. My father cleared his throat. Maybe we misjudged. Let us at least see what you've done so far. I thought about saying no, about protecting the inn from their disapproval the way I'd protected myself. But something inside me shifted. Fine, I said. A short tour. We walked slowly through the halls. My parents pointed out flaws, potential hazards costs I'd already calculated 3 times over. Brandon trailed behind, occasionally poking his head into unfinished rooms like he expected ghosts to jump out. Near the ocean-facing suites, he stopped. Wait, you're renovating these? Yes. For what a luxury experience, he mocked. I opened the balcony doors, letting sunlight spill across the sand. The breeze carried that clean, salty scent only coastal mornings have. This, I said, is why people will come. Brandon stepped outside and fell silent for one rare moment. My parents gazed at the shoreline, their expressions softening against their will. Lucy leaned in close. They can see it, Sienna. Maybe they could. Or maybe they were simply surprised I saw value in something they dismissed as a ruin. When the tour ended, my father nodded once. You've done more than I expected. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't dismissal either. My mother hugged me. Just be careful, please. Brandon remained near the car, sunglasses back on. You really think this place is going to turn heads? It already has, I said. He smirked. We'll see. They drove away, leaving dust swirling in the driveway. I stood there until the SUV disappeared beyond the trees. Theo moved beside me. You okay? Better than I thought I'd be. You didn't let them knock you down this time. No, I said. I didn't. And for the first time in my life, I felt the truth settle deep in my bones. I wasn't rebuilding a hotel. I was rebuilding myself. The storm arrived without mercy. Wind slammed against the shutters so hard, the frames trembled and sheets of rain beat the roof in uneven bursts. I stood in the lobby with a flashlight watching the sky bruise into deep violet as the last boat in the harbor raced for shelter. The Sea Whisper Inn had survived decades, but that night even the building seemed to brace itself. Thunder rumbled so close the floorboards vibrated beneath my feet. I paced the hallway, checking each window latch twice, then a third time. A burst of light flickered outside the ocean, throwing itself against the rocks with violent force. The kind of storm that pulled at every anxious memory you'd ever buried. Theo burst through this back door, drenched from head to toe. The courtyard drains are overflowing, he said, pushing wet hair off his forehead. I tried clearing the leaves, but the water's rising faster than it can escape. Frank followed behind him, carrying a bundle of towels. We should move equipment off the first floor. Anything valuable gets upstairs. I grabbed a stack of plastic sheeting. We'll cover the furniture in the dining room. Lucy's prepping the upstairs rooms. A flash streaked across the sky, followed by a crack of thunder that made Theo flinch. He shot me a crooked smile. I swear I wasn't scared. That was just the building shaking. Despite the tension, I laughed, a short, breathless sound that barely cut through the roar outside. Let's keep moving. We hurried down the hallway. Rain seeped through the warped door frames, forming thin rivulets on the floor. I knelt and pressed a towel against the corner as water pooled beneath the old baseboards. Do you think the inn handled storms like this before? Theo asked. Yes, Frank answered. But it's older now. The weather's stronger than it used to be. The truth hung between us. The power snapped off suddenly, everything plunging into darkness except for the thin blue glow of lightning through the windows. The silence lasted only a second before I clicked on my flashlight. Generator, I called out. Frank grabbed a poncho and ran toward the utility shed. The door slammed behind him, and the storm swallowed the sound. Lucy appeared at the top of the staircase, a flashlight under her chin. We've got leaks in 3 guest rooms. I'm putting buckets down, but the ceiling in Suite 4 looks worse than the rest. Show me, I said. We climbed the stairs as rain pelted the windows hard enough to blur the view outside. Water dripped steadily from the corner of the suite ceiling, splattering into a half-full bucket. That spot wasn't this soft before, Lucy said. A knot formed in my chest. If the roof fails, we'll have to replace the entire panel. Lightning lit up the room, sharp white, unforgiving. In that split second, I saw something in Lucy's eyes that mirrored my own fear. This inn has survived worse, I told her, though I didn't know it was true. Downstairs, a sudden crash echoed through the building. Theo yelled my name. I bolted back down the stairs with him and Lucy behind me. The French doors leading to the courtyard had burst open. Wind whipped the curtains sideways, rain spraying across the lobby floor. Theo pushed against the door muscles, straining, trying to force it shut as the storm shoved back. "Help me," he shouted. I ran forward, bracing my shoulder against the other door. Together we pushed inch by inch until it finally clicked shut. I locked the bolt, breathing fast. "We need something to reinforce it," I said. Theo dragged over one of the heavy lounge chairs and wedged it in front of the doors. "That'll hold for now." Frank stormed in a moment later, soaked and panting. "Generators down. We'll have to wait this out." A fresh pool of water formed near the check-in counter. Lucy hurried to block it with towels. The storm wasn't letting up. The inn creaked, the wind howled, and for a moment it felt like we were standing inside a fragile shell instead of a building meant to house guests. When the next lightning bolt flared, I glimpsed the ocean through the narrow window. The tide had climbed dangerously close to the far edge of the property. "Is that normal?" I whispered. "No," Frank said quietly. "Not this high." The four of us stood together in the dim lobby, listening to the relentless roar outside. Fear pressed against my ribs, but beneath it, a stubborn determination rose. This hotel represented every piece of myself I had fought to reclaim. I wasn't letting a storm, no matter how violent, take it away. I straightened. "We're not losing the Sea Whisper tonight." Lucy nodded immediately. Theo lifted his chin. Frank gripped his tool belt like he was preparing for battle. "Right," Theo said. "What's next, boss?" We worked through the night. We moved equipment upstairs, sealed cracks with whatever materials we had, and checked every vulnerable spot twice. The hours stretched endlessly. At some point, exhaustion numbed the fear. Around 3 a.m, the rain shifted from violent sheets to steady drumming. The wind gradually lost its sharp edge. The worst had passed. I collapsed onto an old armchair drenched in sweat and rainwater. Lucy leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Theo sat on the floor with his back to the bar counter, legs stretched out. Even Frank looked tired for the first time since I'd met him. "We made it," I said softly. Theo raised one hand in triumph. "Barely." Frank surveyed the lobby. "You'll have repairs, but it's nothing we can't handle." His quiet confidence felt like the first warm light after a long blackout. When dawn finally arrived, pale and fragile, the storm clouds parted enough to reveal the shoreline. Seaweed covered the sand in messy tangles. A few shingles lay scattered across the deck. One gutter had ripped loose and dangled like a broken limb. But the inn still stood. I walked onto the veranda and let the cold morning air sting my cheeks. The sea exhaled slowly, calmer now, almost apologetic. Behind me, the Sea Whisper creaked softly, as if relieved. Theo stepped beside me. "Look at her, fighting till the very end." "She's tougher than she looks," I said. "So are you." The words settled deep, warm, and steady, the kind of warmth that keeps you upright after a night you thought might break you. The storm had tested every weak point the inn had, and every weak point in me. But both of us survived. I stood at the front desk with my heart thudding like I'd jogged the entire coastline. The now open sign hung on the front porch rail, swaying gently in the ocean breeze. After months of sweat storms, repairs, and sleepless nights, the Sea Whisper Inn was finally ready to welcome its first guests. Lucy stepped out from the kitchen carrying a tray of lemon water glasses. "Tell me again why I'm more nervous than you." "You're not," I said, smoothing the collar of my blouse. "I'm just better at pretending." Theo wandered in from the courtyard, still wearing the tool belt he refused to take off until the inn was truly spiritually finished. "Cars just pulled in," he announced, peeking through the window. "Showtime." My pulse accelerated. This moment felt impossibly fragile, like touching glass that could crack with too much pressure. The front door opened, and a breeze carried in the warm scent of the sea. The first couple walked inside, a middle-aged pair from Seattle who had emailed me weeks ago asking for a quiet, soulful place to celebrate our anniversary. Behind them came a family with 2 teenagers, their excitement barely contained. Then a woman traveling alone, camera slung over her shoulder, eyes sparkling with curiosity. Each step they took echoed louder than it should have, filling the lobby with the heartbeat of the life I'd been fighting to build. "Welcome to the Sea Whisper Inn," I said, voice steady, despite the storm inside my chest. "I'm Sienna Hartley. Thank you for being here during our opening week." The woman with the camera smiled wide. "I've been following your renovation updates online. This place looks even more beautiful in person." Heat rushed to my cheeks. I hadn't realized anyone beyond friends followed the inn's social page. Lucy offered the lemon water, and the guests murmured their appreciation. Theo discreetly adjusted the floral arrangement on the console table, shooting me a small thumbs up. I handed out room keys one by one, describing ocean views, walking paths, and breakfast hours. As I spoke, something shifted my posture, straightened, my voice warmed, and the nerves fell away. This was the role I'd dreamed of, not simply owner, but host. After the last guest headed upstairs, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We did it. More like you did it, Lucy said. Theo leaned on the counter. Don't get too comfortable. Someone's bound to ask for extra towels. They can have 10, I said, laughing. But the moment didn't stay light for long. A sleek luxury car pulled up outside, dark, polished, unmistakably familiar. My stomach dropped. Brandon stepped out, and he wasn't alone. My parents followed him up the walkway, their expressions unreadable, their clothes too formal for the beach. Behind them came a woman I didn't want to recognize, but instantly did: Natalie, Trent Brandon's longtime business partner, and the person he once told me had real hospitality instincts unlike me. They approached the door as if they owned the place. Lucy whispered, "You want me to block the entrance? I'm small, but I can be aggressive. I appreciate the offer," I said, but no. My parents entered first. My mother took in the lobby with an expression softened by surprise. My father scanned the beams and light fixtures with quiet approval he didn't voice. Brandon strolled in like a man inspecting a property he planned to purchase. His expensive cologne cut sharply through the scent of fresh linen. Natalie's eyes glimmered with interest. "Wow, you actually pulled this off." Theo stiffened. Lucy folded her arms. I kept my tone level. "What are you all doing here?" My mother stepped forward. "We wanted to see your opening day. We thought it might mean something to you." Brandon grinned like he was on a stage. "And we brought someone who can help you grow this project." He gestured toward Natalie. "She runs a boutique marketing firm now, said she might have pointers." "There's nothing I need pointers on today," I said. Natalie approached the check-in desk, tapping her manicured nails against the counter. "You've created something charming, Sienna, but charm doesn't scale. If you'd like this to be more than a hobby, I can show you how to package it, monetize it, maybe even franchise it," Theo muttered. "Unbelievable." Natalie kept going. "These kinds of places need a polished narrative. Your story is sweet, but it's not luxurious. If we rebrand—" "We're not rebranding," I said quietly. Brandon lifted an eyebrow. "Sienna, she's offering to help. You should listen." My spine straightened. "And you should respect that this isn't your business." He laughed under his breath. "You're emotional. That's fine. Opening day jitters." "I'm not emotional," I replied. "I'm clear." Natalie studied me. "So you're turning down support?" "I'm turning down interference." My father cleared his throat. "Maybe we should step outside if this is going to become a scene." "It's not a scene," I said. "It's a boundary." Silence stretched momentarily. A long, taut thread pulled tight. Then my mother softened her expression. "We came to congratulate you, truly." The gentleness in her voice caught me off guard. Before I could respond, the anniversary couple descended the stairs, glowing with delight. "This place is incredible," the husband said. "We couldn't ask for a better start to our trip." "Absolutely magical," his wife added. Natalie's polite smile faltered. Brandon blinked. My parents froze. The husband turned to my family. "You must be so proud of her." My mother swallowed hard. "We are." Theo gave me a subtle look. "See?" Lucy elbowed me lightly. "Told you." A warmth spread through my chest, slow and steady. After months of doubt, storms, repairs, and family skepticism, this moment felt like the first true breath of belonging. "This place is special," the wife continued. "You can feel it the second you walk in." I glanced at the beams we'd sanded by hand, the paint Lucy spent 3 days perfecting the floors. Theo refinished late at night, the rooms Frank rebuilt from the inside out. Every corner reflected the work of people who believed in me long before anyone else did. "This is the start," I said softly. Natalie opened her mouth, but whatever pitch she intended died in her throat. Brandon stared at me like he was seeing something unfamiliar. Someone unfamiliar. My father finally gave one small nod. You did well, Sienna. For once I believed it, not because they said it, but because I could feel the truth of it in the walls, the air, the ocean breathing outside. The inn was alive, the guests were happy, and my dream stood on its own legs, steady and sure. The opening day wasn't perfect. For the first time I stood inside something I had built from nothing and recognized myself in every corner. I woke before sunrise to the sound of knocking sharp, urgent blows that didn't match the soft rhythm of the ocean outside. I pulled on a sweatshirt and headed downstairs, half expecting to find Theo or Lucy with some early morning crisis. But when I opened the door, a man in a crisp navy suit stood waiting, an embossed folder tucked under his arm. "Ms. Hartley?" he asked. "Yes." He extended a business card. "Jordan Miles. I represent Trent Hospitality Group, Natalie's company." A chill threaded down my spine. "What do you want?" "We need to discuss an important matter. May I come in?" I stepped aside reluctantly. He surveyed the lobby with a professional eye, taking in the beams, the art, the polished floors, the sunlight still stretching across the entryway. His expression didn't reveal much, only quiet calculation. "We've reviewed the history of this property," he began. "The Sea Whisper Inn sits on a stretch of coastline recently approved for redevelopment. Trent Hospitality has been acquiring parcels along this area for a future luxury expansion. I'm aware of some developments," I said carefully, "but what does that have to do with me?" He opened the folder. Inside was a glossy rendering of a high-rise resort, sterile, towering, nothing like my inn. "We're interested in purchasing this land. The offer is generous." He slid a sheet across the counter. "More than fair for a business of this size." I didn't touch the paper. "This inn isn't for sale." He didn't flinch. I expected resistance. Ms. Trent asked me to emphasize this: the longer you wait, the lower the offer becomes. Once the redevelopment is formally approved, you'll be pressured by zoning changes, infrastructure shifts, and increasing noise from construction. Your guests won't enjoy that. Anger simmered low in my chest. "So this is a threat." "It's a warning," he corrected. I pushed the folder back toward him. "Tell Natalie I'm not selling." He gathered the documents calmly. "Just remember, sentiment rarely survives market pressure." When he left, the peaceful morning no longer felt peaceful. Lucy appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Who was that?" "He looked like he audits people for fun." "Trouble," I said. Her eyebrows shot up. "Do you want tea or a baseball bat?" "Tea first," I muttered. "Maybe the bat later." We sat in the dining room while I explained the situation. As I spoke, her expression sharpened into something fierce. "She wants to take this place," she said. "Of course she does. You built something authentic, and she doesn't know what to do with authenticity except replace it with concrete." "I'm not selling," I said. "Not now, not ever." Before she responded, Theo entered from the deck with 2 buckets of tools. "Why do you both look like someone launched a hostile takeover?" "Because someone did," Lucy said. Theo listened carefully, his jaw tightening with each detail. "She's trying to scare you," he said. "Stand your ground." "I'll stand it," I said. "I'm just worried about what comes next." We didn't have to wait long to find out. By midday, the inn was buzzing with guests enjoying their vacations. Kids ran across the sand, a couple lounged in hammocks, someone played soft music near the veranda. Everything looked peaceful until a city truck pulled onto the property tires, crunching over gravel. A man stepped out carrying a clipboard. "Hartley," he called. "That's me," I answered. "Need to inspect your coastal boundary line. Some new assessments are being done in the area." My pulse quickened. "Today. Without notice." He tapped his clipboard. "The order came in this morning." Theo leaned toward me. "This smells like Natalie." The inspector wasn't rude, just matter of fact. He walked the perimeter with a tape measure and a camera taking photos of everything: railings, sand levels, vegetation lines. Guests watched with curiosity, and embarrassment crept up my throat. When he finished, he didn't explain much. "You'll receive a report within 10 business days. Could be nothing. Could be a required adjustment to your structures. Hard to say yet." An adjustment, I repeated. "Depends on how close the inn is to the new coastal setback line." "What new line?" He lifted an apologetic shoulder. "Ma'am, I just measure what they tell me to measure." And then he left. As soon as his truck disappeared, frustration crashed over me like a wave. "This is harassment," Lucy said. "She's trying to overwhelm you." Theo paced the deck, rubbing the back of his neck. "If they move that setback line, you could lose part of the property." I steadied myself on the railing. The ocean glittered under the noon sun, deceptively calm. They picked the wrong woman to intimidate. Within minutes, I was on the phone with a local attorney whose number Frank had tucked into our emergency binder just in case. Her voice was brisk but reassuring. "Don't panic," she said. "Developers try this all the time. I'll review the situation. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't let anyone else onto your property without confirming legitimacy with me." After the call, a strange resolve settled inside me, quiet but ironclad. I turned to Theo and Lucy. "We protect this place, no matter what." They stood with me without hesitation. But the day wasn't done throwing surprises. As evening approached, the inn glowed with warm lamplight and the sound of guests chatting over dessert. I felt steadier, more grounded. Then Brandon walked in again, alone this time. He didn't smirk. He didn't glide in like he owned the place. He stood in the doorway, shifting awkwardly hands in his pockets. "Can we talk?" he asked. Theo stiffened behind me. Lucy crossed her arms. I stepped forward before either of them lunged. "We can talk outside," I said. We walked onto the veranda, the ocean a dark stretch under the rising moon. Brandon rested his elbows on the railing. "I heard about the inspector," he said quietly. "And the offer. How Natalie told me." "So you're here to convince me to sell?" "No," he said, surprising me. "I'm here because I didn't realize she'd go this far. She wants that coastline badly. She doesn't care who gets crushed along the way." "Then why are you working with her?" He let out a tired breath. "Because she helped build my career, and because I thought she was smarter than she is." I studied him carefully. His arrogance wasn't gone, but it was cracked like someone had struck the first blow in a long-needed reckoning. "I'm not selling, Brandon," I said. "No matter what she throws at me. I know." We stood in silence for a moment. The wind carried the scent of sea salt and something like regret. He finally turned to me. "You're fighting something bigger than you think. Just don't do it alone." Inside, laughter floated from the dining room. My inn, my guests, my life. "I'm not alone," I told him. Brandon nodded slowly, almost respectfully, before heading to his car. When he drove away, I stayed on the veranda and watched the waves roll in steady, unbroken, relentless, the same way I intended to stand. I arrived at the inn before sunrise, determined to get ahead of whatever Natalie planned next. The air carried a cool bite, the kind that sharpened the senses, and reminded me I was still standing, still fighting. Inside the lobby, lights glowed softly over polished wood and framed art. The quiet steadied me until my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "We need to meet today. It's urgent. Dad." My stomach tightened. Dad rarely texted. Mom usually handled communication schedules reminders. If he reached out directly, it meant something had cracked open. I typed a short reply. "Noon. At the inn." Before I could put the phone away, Lucy appeared with her second mug of coffee hair in a messy bun. "You look like someone just dropped a nightmare into your inbox," she said. "My dad wants to meet." "Alone." She raised an eyebrow. "That's new." "Yeah. I'm not sure whether to prepare tissues or armor. You'll need both," she said, giving my shoulder a light squeeze. "Good luck." By noon, I'd set up a small table on the ocean-facing veranda neutral territory. The waves rolled in with slow, confident sunlight dancing across the surface like it had no idea my family was a disaster waiting to happen. Dad arrived on time wearing the quiet, thoughtful expression he usually saved for complicated math problems or funeral speeches. He walked onto the veranda, paused, and looked out at the water. "This place is beautiful," he said softly, "more than I imagined." "Thanks," I answered. "What's going on?" He took a seat but didn't speak right away. His fingers tapped lightly against the table, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since childhood. "I've been watching," he began. "The inn, the guests, the work you put into this. And I realized something. Unexpected. I folded my hands, waiting. You were always supposed to be the one who stayed small, he continued. Not because you lacked talent, but because life kept pushing you into the background. Brandon took up space, your mother managed everything, and you learned to move quietly. Not too much demand. The words stung more than I expected. He sighed. I was wrong to let that happen. A knot tightened in my throat. Dad, let me finish. His voice grew firmer. I watched your brother dismiss your ideas. I watched your mother dismiss your independence. I watched myself avoid conflict because I thought silence was peace. It wasn't. It was cowardice. The honesty startled me. You've built something they don't understand, he said, looking around again. Something real, something that matters, and I'm proud of you, Sienna. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Hearing approval from him, genuine, without conditions, felt like finding an old wound I didn't know I had. Thank you, I managed. He nodded. But I also came to warn you. Another wave of tension rolled through my chest. About what your mother and Brandon drove to Natalie's office last night. They weren't just talking. They were planning how to pressure you into selling. My breath hitched. They what? They think they're helping, he said. They think if they push you out before the redevelopment begins, you'll avoid disaster. But it's not just misguided. It's selfish. Your mother worries your success will overshadow Brandon's. He worries the same. I froze, stunned. So they'd rather see me lose everything than admit I built something better. Dad's jaw tightened. They see you as a threat now, and Natalie is using it. Anger rose inside me, not loud, but steady and cold. What about you? I asked. Are you with them? No. His answer came instantly. I came here today because I realized something I should have realized years ago. Your life is your own, and you don't owe any of us your success. Wind swept across the veranda, carrying the sound of distant laughter from the beach. Dad reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded document, and set it on the table. What's this? I asked. Proof that your land ownership is protected under an older zoning grandfather clause. Something the inspector conveniently failed to mention. I spent all night researching it. They can't push you off this property easily. I opened the document with careful hands. It was real, detailed, signed. You did this, I whispered. You're my daughter, he said. I should have fought for you sooner. Emotions swelled in my chest, relief mixed with grief for all the years he hadn't stood up. But today he did, and that meant something. Before I could answer, footsteps echoed through the lobby. Mom's voice cut through the space, sharp as always. Sienna, we need to talk right now. Here we go. She marched onto the veranda with Brandon behind her, his expression tight with guilt. Her eyes flicked between me and Dad, irritation blooming. What is he doing here? She snapped. Dad straightened. Supporting our daughter. The shock on her face was almost theatrical. I rose slowly. You wanted to talk? Talk. Mom's jaw clenched. Natalie told us you're being stubborn. If you sell now, you'll receive a generous payout. It's the smartest choice. You should take it before everything collapses. Brandon wouldn't meet my eyes. Shame pulled at his features. I'm not selling, I said calmly. Mom scoffed. You're making a foolish, emotional decision. Think logically for once. For once, Dad repeated, incredulous. Mom ignored him. You built a quaint little coastal inn. That's nice, but you aren't prepared for corporate development battles. Let the professionals handle the land. Take the money and walk away before you ruin yourself. I stepped forward, meeting her gaze with a steady calm. You think ruining myself means fighting back, I said. But the truth is, I ruined myself for years trying to earn your approval. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. This inn, I continued, is proof that I don't need permission to live a life that's mine. Brandon shifted, torn. Sienna, maybe you should consider... No, Dad cut in sharply. You don't get to pressure her anymore. Silence snapped across the veranda. Mom looked at him like he'd grown a second head. You're taking her side over your own son. For the first time in years, he said, I'm taking the side of the person who actually deserves support. Her mouth tightened. So this is how it is now. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. It's how it should have been, I said. Mom stared at me long and hard, searching for some crack in my resolve, but I didn't budge. "Fine," she said, turning away. "When everything falls apart, don't expect us to pick up the pieces." She stormed out, heels striking the floor in sharp, angry pulses. Brandon lingered, eyes heavy with regret. "I didn't know she'd push this far," he murmured. "I'm sorry. You can decide who you want to be from here on," I said. "That's all I can tell you." He nodded slowly and followed Mom toward the parking lot. When the last echo of their footsteps faded, I leaned against the railing and exhaled shakily. Dad remained beside me, steady quiet. "You handled that with grace," he said. "I handled it because I had to." "No," he replied gently. "You handled it because you've grown into someone stronger than any of us ever realized." This time the emotion that rose in my chest didn't hurt. It clarified, strengthened, everything was shifting, and the next battle would decide everything. Brandon reached the front doors before I did, pacing in tight circles, like he was practicing excuses under his breath. The ocean wind carried the scent of salt and jasmine drifting across the veranda as staff arranged fresh flowers, polished brass rails, and adjusted the crisp linen uniforms we had custom-made for opening week. Everything shimmered with quiet elegance, and for the first time in years, my brother looked small inside a world he once claimed I could never touch. He turned when he heard the soft chime of the lobby doors opening. His expression tense, restless, unnerved, collapsed into shock the moment he saw the full staff assembled behind me. Maria, our front desk manager, straightened her blazer. Daniel, the concierge, lifted his chin. The entire Sea Whisper team stood ready in a perfect line. When I stepped forward, they moved as one. "Welcome back, Madam Boss," they said, bowing with practiced grace. Brandon's face was drained of color. I kept my voice calm. "You asked to see me. Here I am." He swallowed hard, glancing from me to the staff, then back again. "Sienna, I didn't expect that I'd build something refined, something more than cheap motels." My tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. He rubbed the back of his neck, the same gesture he used as a kid when he got caught lying. "I was wrong. Okay, I said stupid things. I didn't know you were capable of all this." "That's the point," I replied. "You didn't care to know." His gaze drifted across the lobby, soft amber lights glimmering over white oak floors, sculptural greenery, and the mural of the coastline I'd commissioned. He traced the room with stunned eyes, then returned to me. When did you become this?" "I always was," I said. "You just weren't looking." Behind us, guests were checking out, pausing to admire the coral art installation near the elevator. Every detail whispered the same truth: I had built a boutique haven shaped by intention, heart, and the very soul my brother claimed I lacked. He cleared his throat. "Mom told me you humiliated her. She said you turned Dad against her." "I didn't turn anyone," I answered. He saw what happened with his own eyes. Brandon's jaw tightened, but the fight inside him faltered. He looked older suddenly, not in age, but in realization. "Dad stopped by my place last night," he said quietly. "He told me I should listen to you, that I should try being a brother for once." The honesty in his voice startled me, not because he said it, but because he sounded like he meant it. "What do you want, Brandon?" I asked. He exhaled long and uneven, a chance to fix things. I gestured for him to follow me outside. We stepped onto the terrace overlooking the ocean, where soft jazz played and the late afternoon sun dipped low over the water. Waves shimmered in gold, breaking against smooth stones. A couple sipped wine near the fire pit. 2 guests laughed as a breeze scattered petals across the deck. "This is yours," Brandon whispered, awe creeping into every word. "Yes, it's incredible," he said. "You're incredible. I never said that before." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." Something inside him broke open. Maybe guilt, maybe grief, maybe both. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said. "I know that." I stood beside the railing, letting the wind brush through my hair. "I don't want you to earn forgiveness," I said. "I want you to earn respect for me, for yourself, for people who don't fit inside the narrow world you built in your head." He nodded, eyes glistening. I can try. Start by being someone your son would admire, I said. Someone who doesn't belittle people because their dreams don't look like yours. He inhaled sharply. I will. Footsteps approached from behind. Dad stepped out onto the terrace, stopping when he spotted us. Everything all right out here? He asked gently. Brandon turned to him, voice steady for the first time all day. I'm making it right. Dad's expression softened with something close to pride. Good, he said. It's time. Brandon looked at me one more time. Sienna, I mean it. I'm sorry. I hear you, I said. Now show me. He nodded and walked toward the parking area. But just before he reached the gate, he paused, turned, watched the inn glowing behind me. The staff passed by him, greeting him politely, each one knowing the story in pieces. And he bowed slightly awkward but sincere before heading to his car. Dad joined me at the railing. He'll never forget today, he murmured. Neither will I. We watched the horizon fade into deeper shades of copper. The Sea Whisper sign, our elegant signature lit in warm amber, glowed against the gathering dusk. You built something worth admiring, Dad said. Not just an inn, a life. For once, I believed him. Mom arrived later that evening, but this time there was no storm in her stride. She stood at the threshold, unsure, her voice smaller than I had ever heard. Sienna, may I come in? I looked at her long enough to let the truth settle between us. Yes, I said at last, but understand this is my world, and the rules here are different. She lowered her gaze. I understand. We talked slowly, carefully, not about blame, but about boundaries, choices, and the possibility of rebuilding something new. By the time she left, nothing was perfect. But something important had shifted. Later that night, as the inn quieted and the stars blinked awake above the ocean, I stood on the balcony overlooking the courtyard. Lanterns swayed in the breeze. Laughter drifted from the dining terrace. The building seemed to breathe with a life of its own. I realized I'd done exactly what my brother insisted I never could. I built something beautiful. Its walls held my journey, its light held my courage, and for once I didn't feel the need to shrink to fit anyone's expectations. If you're listening right now, I want to know, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Share your story in the comments. And if this journey resonated with you, like and subscribe so we can keep walking through more stories together.